My name is Ali, I'm a doctor and YouTuber.
I'm Taymor, I'm a data scientist and writer.
And you're listening to Not Overthinking,
the weekly podcast where we think about happiness, creativity, and the human condition. Are you leading us in?
Hello and welcome to Not Overthinking. Taymor, how are you doing today?
Doing pretty well, yeah. Yesterday I went and hung out in a outdoor space with some friends, and that was really nice. It's kind of got me back on the real human interaction hype. So I think I felt energized after that.
Felt energized after human interaction.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Whereas I think, a lot of the time everything just seems kind of futile. There's like this sort of sense of like, what's the point of all of this, Whereas, kind of hanging out with people again, it was like, oh, okay, this is the point.
And there was a phrase I heard, which is that these days life seems like just one long Zoom call.
Yeah, exactly. How about you?
Yeah, things are going pretty good. I feel like last night I finally kind of sorted out what I'm going to do with my life. So I feel sort of excited and motivated moving forward.
What is it? What's the plan?
One of the things I'm going to do with my life is continue my commitment to lifelong learning by taking some more classes on Skillshare, who are very kindly sponsoring this episode rather. If you haven't heard by now, if you've been living under a rock, Skillshare is a fantastic platform with loads of online classes from all sorts of topics, ranging from video editing to illustration to graphic design to loads of business stuff, loads of creative stuff. You should definitely check out Skillshare. So go to skillshare.com/notoverthinking to get a 2-month free trial of Skillshare. Because I've got 3 of my own classes on Skillshare. I've got a really long one about how to study for exams, another really long one about how to use Anki flashcards to learn anything, and another really long one about how to edit videos. And sneak peek, next week, I am releasing a brand new productivity class on Skillshare. So this is the first you guys are hearing of it on the podcast. So if you sign up for your free 2-month free trial of Skillshare, you will kind of have enough time to watch all my other classes, and it'll just be really good, and it'll support the podcast. So yeah, help us out, guys. Go to skillshare.com/notoverthinking. How was that?
Nice. I think that was pretty good. How many Skillshare classes do you have now?
Mate, 3 so far. The productivity one is coming out next week. We've got a second productivity one coming out next month.
How much work is it to churn out one of these? Is it like a day of just like writing the script and filming it or something?
It's overall it's about 2 days of work in total on my end, and then the editing is done by the editor.
Right.
So yeah, it just takes a lot of effort to kind of plan the class and then sort of have the motivation / discipline to just sort of sit down for an entire day and just kind of bash through like 50 videos, filming one after the other.
Yeah.
But it's fun.
That's pretty cool, yeah.
So that's what I'm doing with my life. Just a commitment to lifelong learning.
Wait, is that that's the life plan?
No, that's not the life plan.
What was the life plan, or was that a complete joke just for the ad read?
No, the life plan is that I have decided I'm going to take the USMLE and move to America.
Really?
Yeah.
Wasn't this already the life plan?
This was partially the life plan. I'd been sort of toying with it, but I was sort of umming and ahhing about it, because I was thinking, well, America isn't all that it's hyped up to be anyway. Life in the UK is pretty chill. It's pretty fun. I was sort of in 2 minds about whether I would want to stay in medicine at all. So over the last few weeks, I've realized that A, I do want to stay in medicine just in a part-time capacity. B, I think emergency medicine is now the way forward, as in terms of the specialty that I want to do. And C, that going to America at the very least would be an interesting adventure for a few years.
Yeah, that sounds pretty legit. Nice. I'm glad you figured out the life plan.
It feels kind of good, really, because like I'd been lying awake at night these last some nights this week thinking because I had like 4 days off work randomly because of annual leave and sort of days kind of adding up. And I was thinking each morning that when I was waking up, I was like, what's my ikigai? What's my reason for getting out of bed in the morning?
Yeah.
And I was sort of thinking, well, I guess I could make a few videos, but I filmed like 8 videos yesterday, so I guess I could just play some PS4, play some Horizon. I guess I could stream it, and that would be somewhat. And I just had this like very sort of odd sensation of not really having an aim, more like, well, everything's sort of going great really on the YouTube front.
Yeah.
Just kind of making a few videos a week, and that's all fine. And then I was really concerned that come August, when I'll be unemployed, and kind of going to work will no longer be my reason for getting out of bed in the morning. Like, what am I going to do?
Then there's a big void, yeah.
Then there's a huge void, yeah. So I've been reading all these articles and stuff about the void of these people who've were chasing the hashtag passive income lifestyle for a very long time.
Yeah.
And then they achieved it and they realized, hang on, just because I can stick it to the man, it's now like my life hasn't suddenly become more magical and meaningful.
Yeah.
I got to do something with my time.
Yeah.
And then there's a few articles from like Nat Elyson and Mark Manson about how they kind of traveled the world for a few years and lived that nomadic lifestyle.
Yeah.
And then Mark Manson has a really good one. He talks about how he's not really excited by parties anymore because he's been to like, the biggest parties in the world. He's been to like the carnival in Rio de Janeiro, but the things that he finds fun in life now are just having a barbecue with some friends at home or attending a birthday party or something.
Yeah.
But I suspect it's sort of like that thing. Who is it? Is it like Jim Carrey who says that I wish everyone could become rich because then they'd realize that it's not the answer.
Yeah, I'm sure lots of people have said similar sentiments.
So I feel it's sort of like that once you're living this sort of nomadic passive income lifestyle and hashtag living the dream, you realize actually I quite like to settle down and have a wife and kids and just pay the mortgage and work a 9 to 5. so it sort of goes full circle. But now I have something to work towards, some sort of bigger project that I'm...
Right, some sense of like meaning.
Some sense of meaning, yeah. A reason to get up in the morning to do my Anki flashcards.
Yeah.
More on skillshare.com/notoverthinking to check out my class on Anki.
I still don't understand it seems like if you just want to do medicine kind of part-time, and by part-time, let's be real, it's not going to be like 4 days a week. It's going to be like 1 or 2 days a week.
More like 2 or 3 days a week, yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
3 days a week is a lot.
Is it?
That's like half the week. Is that really the best use of your time or even the most fun use of your time?
I mean, if
it seems like
it's one of those things that you can always kind of change your mind on and you can sort of tweak based on how much you're enjoying it, such how much you're learning.
Sure.
I think in the early days it's useful to do more because then you're actively kind of learning more. You're more on the on the steep bit of the learning curve, and then over time you can cut down the hours if you like. If you find that it's fun, then you've got the option.
But taking this exam to move to the US seems like quite a high fixed cost for this thing that you don't actually care that much about, and it almost feels like you're just desperate for something to do. It's like, oh cool, there's an exam. I know how exams work. that'll pass the time for a few months or something,
Pretty much. So my friend Rohan said something similar. He said it sounds like you need something to do. This is something to do, therefore you're doing it.
Yeah, it really feels like that. And yeah, I guess it comes down to like what actually is the sort of time and effort cost of taking this exam. Are we talking like 6 months of studying every day? Are we talking like 1 month of studying every day?
We're talking like 9 months of studying a few hours every day.
What?
Is that a lot?
That's a lot, dude. Are you serious?
What's wrong with that? Studying is fun.
Is it the most fun?
Well, it's probably not the most fun, but it's quite fun.
Damn. All right.
And I think like once I've made the decision that yes, I do want to stay in medicine, at that point it simplifies a lot of the other decision making. So it's like, okay, cool. Given that I want to stay in medicine, do I want to go to the UK route or the America route?
What's good about doing sort of medicine the America route? I mean, the main appeal for most people is the money, but presumably you're comfortable from all your non-medical stuff. So like, what's the point of grafting through these exams to just get a slightly different job?
Mostly for the adventure, really. Like it would
the adventure of doing an exam.
The adventure of kind of trying to move to America. It's just kind of fun, kind of funny.
There's like 1 million countries.
Yeah.
All right. Don't write in and tell me that there's not actually 1 million countries, but there's lots of countries. Like, sure. What do you mean? Like, why would you choose this one where you have to spend 9 months studying for an exam just as an entry requirement?
So in most countries, you have to do there's some sort of work required to get in.
Okay.
I don't think I'd want to do it in a country like Cambodia, for example.
Sure.
Like, so there's a subset of countries where a medical qualification is sort of internationally recognized as being legit. The UK is sort of one of them. The US is kind of the gold standard for most places around the world. Canada is another one of them. Canada is like apparently like super hard to get into as an international because of all they've hardly got jobs for their own people.
Okay.
America, we've got friends there, we've got family there. There's YouTube collaborations there. It's sort of the part of the world where the most of my audience is in. There just feels like there's all sorts of benefits about having this, at least this association with America for at least a few years. I'm not saying necessarily to live in forever.
Yeah.
The American residency program for training is fairly short, like 3 or 4 years. In the UK, it's like 8 years. Like, there's...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I guess that kind of makes sense.
It seems to make sense.
All right, that's pretty cool. I'm glad you've got it all figured out.
Yeah, man. So I started doing Pathoma, which is this pathology revision resource, like last night, and I finished one of the chapters this morning, and it's just really fun.
Nice.
because it's like I think I think when you're a medical student and you're learning all this stuff for the first time, it is not that fun because you it's sort of like learning how to code without having a project.
Right.
The only thing you're doing is at the end of it, you're like, okay, well, I just need to be able to pass this test and sort of regurgitate all this information. But now, having worked as a doctor for 2 years and revisiting all this stuff, I'm thinking, oh, yeah, that actually makes sense. And I'm glad I understand this now. Sort of like when I do courses on Brilliant in computer science, like given that I already know how to code, it's kind of helpful to see the first principles. So it's just generally kind of fun.
Nice.
And so I've been planning a kind of like what my ideal day would look like from August the 4th. Being like, right, wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning, go to the gym.
No, you do your thankfulness practice and your meditation.
No. I'm coming to that.
Oh, okay.
Come on. Wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning, go to the gym, preferably cycle to the gym, which is like a 20-minute bike ride. And then at the gym, do a workout, and then do a little swim, then do a little spa session. And in the spa, I do my meditation and thankfulness practice on the iPad. And then go to the gym's restaurant, grab a cheeky latte, grab some breakfast, do my 1,000 words of writing for the day, do kind of 20 minutes or like 2 Pomodoros worth of Anki flashcards for my stuff, maybe do some practice questions, cycle into town, have lunch in town, sort of maybe hang out with someone for lunch if people are around in town, and then do some more work/writing/video stuff. Then go home, film a video or 2, and then do gaming and streaming in the evenings. Yes, that's nice. My life sorted.
That sounds great. I mean, if you could pull that off every day, that sounds really good.
Yeah, so that's what I've been sort of dreaming about.
I wonder if it's really that easy. I'm just like, this is the plan and I'm going to do it.
Well, I think having something to work towards means that the plan is more likely to happen.
Yeah.
And as soon as it becomes like a routine that, I just get up and then I go to the gym.
Yeah.
Kind of like I get up and go to work. It's not an option.
Yeah.
So, nice. Yeah, I think it'll be fun.
Good stuff. Why don't we get started with today's episode? So there's a few different things I'd like to talk about. Sure. The first is a couple of responses that we had to last week's episode, which was about Black Lives Matter movement and sort of social justice more generally. So we had a couple of interesting responses. The first was a series of hate mails from a listener to both the Not Overthinking email address and my personal email address. But the impression I got was that her beef was primarily with you.
Oh, okay.
So let me try and get these emails up. To be honest, I don't think it's... I'll just remind myself. I read through them. I'll remind myself what they were about, but I don't think it's necessarily useful for anyone if we just like read out the entire thing.
Okay, but like, our preamble at the start wasn't particularly useful to anyone, yet we do it anyway.
I mean, I think it was interesting for you and I to talk about that.
So on the hate mail front, so firstly, are you sure it's fair to characterize these emails as hate mail? Okay, fine.
Unilaterally.
Unilateral hate mail. I've not read them, but I remember when you messaged me a few days ago being like, bro, have you seen your hate mail? I sort of had the sinking pit in my stomach and I was like, oh, really? God, yeah.
Why?
And I almost never get that feeling. It was sort of similar to the one where I started getting I got all these negative comments about my Microsoft Surface review.
Yeah.
Because, I think any hate mail that we would have got from that episode would have been justified to some extent. At least I was thinking in my head that, okay, I can imagine the sort of hate mail people are going to send in for this particular episode.
Yeah.
And then you sent me that message being like, bro, have you seen the hate mail? And I was like, no, not yet. And then I was like, oh, this is interesting. And I thought it might be quite fun just to read out segments of it on the podcast as like a first time reaction to it.
Okay, let me bring it up. Okay.
Because I think like at the very least, the response to hate mail, the response to criticism, the response to negative comments, etc., is a generally interesting thing to talk about and a generally applicable thing. In that a lot of people ask like why I don't care about the hate comments that I receive. I get on YouTube videos and like
right. I mean, there's just a lot of them. It's gonna take up a lot of time.
Really?
Okay, let me just try and find.
And it's all from the same person.
Yeah, there's loads.
What, like 10?
Maybe like 7.
There are 7 emails from a single person.
Yes. Where is it? I'm trying to find the first one. Is this the first one? I think this must be the first. Is it gone? Here we go. Okay, I think this is the initial set of emails.
The initial set.
Yeah. Okay, so it seems like one of the objections that this listener has was the discussion about the statistics. So I think in the episode last week, you mentioned something about like, I've seen lots of people saying that actually if you look at the stats, it tells a different story or something. And so I think that's sort of one concrete thing that this person objects to. I'm trying to find the other concrete things.
That doesn't sound very hate maily.
Mate, it took me 5 minutes of scanning this email to be able to pull out this concrete objection that I could state nicely on the podcast.
So why do you object to reading out just like some flavors of the email? Or do you think it's sort of mean on the person who sent it in? In a way that it's kind of making fun of their...
I think that's basically it. It's kind of like, it's kind of like making fun of the other person, really. Okay. And I don't think there's much point in that.
Okay, fair enough.
So I think in terms of the concrete issues that this listener had, she takes issue with the discussion about statistics, and so she like just to give you an idea of the sort of hate aspect of this. For example, in this first initial email, she mentions the statistics, and then there's a paragraph of stuff talking about her own personal experiences or something, and that paragraph ends with "fuck you, Ali," and then in the second paragraph, there doesn't seem to be any like substantive sort of comments, but she mentions, "You are a piece of shit. Just keep your mouth shut." So look, it's this kind of stuff.
Oh, interesting.
And like
the sort of stuff that if it were a YouTube comment, I would screenshot and share to my Instagram story.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, interesting.
And then interestingly, there's also like a bit of a race war, them versus us kind of narrative, where I think she sort of sees you and I as being like in camp A, which is like Indians, Pakistanis, that camp.
Okay.
And then there's camp B, which is black people, and there's camp C, which is white people.
Okay.
And she mentions there's a lot of like them versus us. So like she mentions white people shot MLK Jr. and you really believe them over us. She mentions that she thinks you are deluded in thinking that you are a white man. I think on the podcast you mentioned that you feel like you benefit from a lot of traditionally white male privilege. And I think that's what she might be referring to there. And then she mentions that we should address issues in Indian and Pakistani culture before talking about the US. So I'll just read it out. She says, "Address gang rapes in Pakistan and India, then maybe I'll respect you talking about the USA. Talk about skin bleaching and femicide in..." a bunch of swearing after that. So let me just try and find the other like substantive objections. I don't think we should like...
Okay, this sounds like something where I should kind of
entertain ourselves with like, oh, haha, we're getting sworn out or something. I don't think that's a very nice thing to keep indulging in.
That's very nice of you. These sounds like the emails where I would just post on my Instagram story for the entertainment of the masses.
Yeah, but it's also a real person behind this. She clearly feels a certain way about this. So she mentions that.
Damn, that's so nice of you.
This is kind of interesting to hear. She mentions the two of you complaining about black people for 85 minutes was nauseating. We are not obligated to give a shit about performative activism from people with bigotry in their past, and we are not a monolith. I'm not sure what she's talking about. She mentions that to label the whole of the black community as complainers is disgusting. I don't think we labeled anyone as a complainer. I'm not sure what she's getting at. And look, to some extent, this is, discussing this or whatever and like, giving some kind of rebuttal. It's kind of unfair because she's not here to kind of respond.
Absolutely.
But I think it's worth talking about a couple of things because I have seen them come up in other discussions. So I think in general...
So we've got a voice note as well, don't we?
Yes, yeah. But let's just talk about this first. Yeah, look, there's not enough time to go through all the emails at all. But I get this general sense. I think that the two concrete things which led to this person writing this email was your mention of having Ben Shapiro videos recommended on your YouTube.
Yep.
That was like one thing which she kind of pulled out.
Clearly, I don't know what Molly's been doing on my YouTube account. God, there's Ben Shapiro videos.
All right, yeah. So I get the impression that the Ben Shapiro, the mention that you are like watching these kind of Ben Shapiro style, and for those of you who don't know, Ben Shapiro is like, I guess most people would label him an alt-right kind of guy. Is that right?
What does alt-right even mean, as opposed to just...
I don't know. I don't really know, to be honest. It's like this new wave of sort of, it's like right-wing, but youngish people on the internet who watch YouTube videos instead of like Fox News or something, you know?
Oh, okay. Fair enough.
That's
that
my
would be fair.
impression of it.
Yep.
Anyway, so Ben Shapiro is this kind of right-wing guy who disagrees with a lot of lefty kind of stuff. So I think the thing you said about you watching these kinds of videos on YouTube, plus the thing you mentioned about the statistics, I think those were the two kind of concrete things which triggered this response. And I think those two on their own are maybe are perfectly objectionable, and there's a reasonable kind of pushback to, it's bad to watch those videos for this reason. The statistics thing, you're wrong about it for this reason. I think that those are pretty reasonable.
Yeah, fair enough.
But one thing I've noticed in a lot of discussions about this topic and other sort of sensitive issues is that I think communication seems very dependent on how nice a person you think the other person is. So let me just try and find. There's a really good tweet. I can't get it on my phone because my phone is currently recording me. Does photos work here? Yes, it does. Here it is. So this is a tweet from a woman called Sarah Constantine, who I follow on Twitter at S_R_Constantine. We'll put a link in the show notes. She mentions that if I want to write about a controversial subject, I spend at least half the space establishing that I'm a nice and empathetic person. It seems necessary. People who don't do it get attacked and misunderstood. Some people find it tedious. And this is one thing I've kind of noticed, that if you want to have any kind of discussion about any of these topics, you do have to spend an awful lot of time establishing that, you are a nice person, in inverted commas. And if you don't do that, then a lot of what you say might be interpreted less than charitably. So, for example, and actually, when we recorded the episode, I definitely felt a pressure to, establish that, hey, look, the starting point is that we're
staunch lefties here.
We're staunch lefties. We're very sympathetic towards this cause. We want to explore a couple of things. And I feel like, I'm not sure how I feel about this thing. I think it's definitely a phenomenon where if you don't do that, you will kind of be painted in a very different light than if you do that. And so what do you think about that? Like, have you found that to be true?
Definitely. I think the phrase that I always seem to come back to, which is another phrase that someone like Ben Shapiro would love to use, is the phrase identity politics.
Right.
In that it seems like with a lot of these, seemingly controversial issues, a lot of it is based on what you want to believe, and the kind of, as we discussed last week, the moral righteousness with which you want to believe the thing. And so given that there's this element of, I believe this, I believe this, therefore I'm a good person, but also I'm a good person, therefore I believe this. The identity as a morally good and righteous citizen of the world gets so tied up within these particular beliefs that it means that that if you hear an opposing viewpoint, in addition to the viewpoint, you've also got that person has the opposite viewpoint to me, therefore that person is a bad person.
Yep.
And then when you paint that person with a brush of being a, quote, bad or evil person, at that point, like, everything just gets mired up very much, very, very much.
Yeah.
And I think when it comes to other controversial, like, Windows versus Mac, you see less requirement to virtue signal before you can get into these debates. Because no one really is arguing that if you prefer Mac, you are actually a morally good and righteous person, and if you don't, you're not.
Yeah.
But when it comes to things like, I don't know, Black Lives Matters or any kind of feminist issues, any kind of trans rights issues, anything along those lines, that is very much tied up because I believe this thing, I'm a good person, and also I'm a good person, therefore I believe this thing.
Yeah.
And so I find it, obviously I was really concerned at the end of last week in that what it would have sounded like to someone who didn't know us, specifically me, because I don't like to speak for you as well. What it would have sounded like for someone who didn't know my default position as a staunch lefty. It would have sounded like I was giving a lot of credence to sort of the Ben Shapiro right wing style of things. But obviously my default position was that I'm sort of like 98% lefty in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
Therefore, from my perspective, it's like, well, I kind of don't want to bother establishing all of that stuff, because what's the point?
Yeah.
The more interesting discussion comes to the kind of the more nuances, the opposing viewpoint, rather than in saying that, guys, trust me, I'm a nice guy and all. I voted Labour, trust me. I even photographed my thingy and then post it on Instagram before Molly messaged me being like, take it down, it's illegal.
Yeah.
And I had to Google it on BBC to make sure it was. And then
I would have voted for Obama 3 times if I could.
Exactly. Yeah. I've got 2 black friends.
Yeah.
All of that stuff. I think it's extremely tedious and it takes away a lot from this debate.
Yeah.
But I think it's sort of like what that apparent history professor tweeted that seems to be have been going around, that when it comes to these sorts of topics where one side of it, where there seems to be a morally correct response and a morally incorrect response from people on both sides of it, it's really hard to talk about without fear of repercussions, fear of losing your job, fear of being cancelled, fear of all this and that.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
The thing is, I don't think it's entirely unreasonable, right? So, if you're having a discussion with someone about something, there's like a spectrum of charitability, you can call it, about like how charitable you are when you interpret what the other person is saying, right? And for example, on the highest end of the spectrum might be someone that you have a crush on, and anything they say you view it in like the best light, and you think their jokes are really funny, and that they can't possibly say or do anything wrong. And on the other end of the spectrum is someone who you see as being from a rival tribe to you, where you kind of see them as a bad person and stuff. And so whatever they say, you will, have a very uncharitable interpretation. And,
is there ever a value in not being towards the charitable end of the spectrum? I don't think there is.
Possibly. So for example, let's say I was talking to, or rather, let's say 2 people are having a discussion. One person might be a sort of like the kind of person who sent us that email, who feels very strongly about this particular issue and has clearly spent some amount of time thinking about it and experiencing it firsthand. And let's say they're having a discussion with someone who, let's just say some like, random kind of white person who's just turned on the news for the first time in his life, and his default response to this stuff is kind of like, what's the big deal kind of thing, right? Now, if that sort of if that white person in this case voices some objections like, oh, but the statistics or whatever, or like, oh, how about the looting though, then based on the kind of identity view of things, where that person is like, on the other side of the identity politics spectrum, it's not it's kind of useful to understand that, because then it's a very different discussion, right? Like, for example, if there are sort of a number of sort of, what's the word? I don't want to say intellectual is a weird word, but intellectuals, shall we say, who are black and who might who certainly sort of sympathize with some of the more right-wing stuff. There are certainly kind of some black people who would say, who would be big on like the statistics stuff and say that like actually the stats are kind of complicated, maybe. And if, for example, you're having a conversation with that person, then the fact that they are black, it does tell you something. It tells you that, they've experienced this stuff firsthand. And given all of that, they're still saying this thing. And so I would view the black person saying that in a very different light to the white guy who just turned on the news for the first time.
Okay, sure.
And you can assume you can assume much more good faith from, in this case, the black person who's making exactly the same point as the sort of basic white person, if you will, right?
What do you mean by good faith?
Good faith as in...
Because my definition of good faith would be seeking to understand and talking from a place of and talking given all of the information that you currently hold. And therefore, I would say that the white dude who turned on the news for the first time and is like, yeah, but what about the stats, or what about that looting though? My default position would be to say that they're operating in good faith. They're genuinely trying to understand what's going on and are unable to understand what's going on because of the stats situation and the looting situation. And so if our objective is to change that person's mind or to help them understand, then interpreting their lack of understanding as charitably as possible, rather than, fuck you, you piece of shit, you have no idea what I'm going through, which sort of kind of goes into the tone policing thing. But like, I think we established in the last episode that if our objective is to change people's minds, then it's more helpful to kind of talk to them on their in the language that they understand. I don't think there's any less good faith coming from this white dude who turned on the news than there is from the black guy who says about the stats being a thing.
Okay, maybe good faith was the wrong term, but
as in, I accept that if there is like a black conservative person using the stats argument, one would hope that there is some. I agree that it probably would carry more weight because you know that this black person has probably experienced at least some degree of the systematic oppression / implicit racism that a lot of other black people would, quote, complain about, complain being the wrong word, but, talk about it at least. But going back to my original point, I don't think it's ever useful to not interpret people's views charitably. And what I'm thinking of in a completely like non-controversial setting is that, for example, people who watch Gary Vaynerchuk for the first time are going to think this guy's full of shit, like he's full of hot air, like what the hell is going on? And it's like actively their loss by not interpreting him more charitably. Like,
Look, I obviously totally agree with this in general. However, I do think there is a bit of a difference.
Okay.
In that, like, for example, okay, maybe charitably, again, is the wrong word, but the conversation to be had with a black conservative who's talking about the stats is a different conversation than the conversation to be had with, sort of a basic white person who's
agreed. Yeah, absolutely.
That's just that's kind of what I mean. That like
having a conversation on different levels. Sure.
Yeah, the identity politics lens it's kind of useful in that sense, right? It's somewhat useful to inform, like, what conversation do we need to be having here.
Yeah, 100%. I'm fully on board with that. I'm not sure what we were disagreeing about initially. Were we disagreeing about?
I don't think we were disagreeing. I fully agree with the charitable thing.
Yeah.
I was just saying that, like, it's not entirely unreasonable.
So you were saying
to view things through the lens.
Agreed. So you were saying that there's this kind of spectrum of you viewing anything someone says, the most charitable end of the spectrum being, this is the person I've got a crush on, or the person I admire on the internet, everything they say must be legit. Like anytime Naval tweets something, even if you disagree with it, you think, oh, dear, he must know something I don't. And then on the other end,
I will leave my wife, Naval. Thank you.
Other end of the spectrum, anytime Donald Trump tweets something,
right? Even
if he's tweeting, guys, the best way to get rich is to get famous, you're going to think, no, this guy does not know what he's talking about,
and that's reasonable. Trump versus Naval is a joke and a meme at this point. Like, Trump versus Naval is good. Like, if Naval tells you something, you'll think, okay, this guy's probably spent some time thinking about it. He's probably fairly well reasoned in arriving at this conclusion. Yep. If Trump says exactly the same thing,
yep. The natural assumption would be to assume that Trump is just chatting breeze and hasn't spent any time thinking about the situation.
Yeah,
from people like us
interpreting,
and yet from a right-wing white intellectual person who's like full-on Trump supporter, they might be thinking, "Who is this like random Indian dude Naval? He's an immigrant." And like, yes, Trump, you tweeted exactly the same thing. Yes, my boy.
Okay, no, but okay. For example, just as like a very extreme edge case, I think it's probably not terribly useful to interpret Trump's tweets very charitably, or the stuff Trump says. It's probably not useful to interpret it charitably.
Useful to whom?
Sorry?
Useful to whom?
Useful to the person reading them. For example, you just said, is it ever useful not to interpret things charitably? I think there are, like, obviously extreme edge cases like Trump where, it's useful not to interpret it charitably.
Okay, why?
Sorry?
Help me understand. Like, what do you mean useful to the person reading it? As if I read a Trump tweet, if most lefties like me and you read a Trump tweet, we think, oh, Trump again.
Yep.
I don't think that's particularly useful at all. I think it's actively unhelpful that we think of Trump's tweets.
No. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that, for example, if Trump tweets something like, he tweeted that thing last week or the week before or something about like
China in all caps.
No, that was the
week before.
He tweets something about when the looting starts, the shooting starts or something.
Fine.
And if he tweets something that is that can very obviously be seen, and it's not clear whether he was actually inciting violence with his tweet. Some people think he was, some people think he wasn't. But for example, if he tweets something that is actually inciting violence, it's not useful for for example, half the country to sit around thinking, actually, he could have meant it in a metaphorical sense, while like violence is just kicked off by the other half of the country who read his tweet and took it at face value, right? So it's not useful in that sense to interpret it charitably.
So, what are you saying? In that context, it's more useful to interpret it as the ravings of a madman.
Yeah, almost. I mean, I don't know what you mean by ravings of a madman, but
I mean, that tends to be mostly how people view Trump's tweets.
I mean, interpreting it at like face value. For example, if Trump tweets something,
Yeah.
I think a reasonable interpretation is, or a reasonable way to try and interpret it is, okay, what message does this send to, the American people or something, or the world, right? And that message, and that will help you understand what is about to happen as a result of this tweet. If you try and read the tweet with the interpretation of what's the most charitable way I can interpret, Premier Trump's tweet right now, and actually, you might conclude, man, he really loves black people or something. That might be the most charitable interpretation. That's not useful, right? Like in that context, the most useful way to interpret it is to understand what most people, what actually is he saying, and like what takeaway will most people get. Do you understand what I mean?
No. Okay, so let's take some edge cases. Let's imagine Trump tweets, "Kill all the black people."
Okay.
He's not going to tweet that, but as a hypothetical, in that context, yeah, sure, fine. I mean, I don't think there is a charitable interpretation of that. But when it comes to a tweet like when the looting starts, the shooting starts, like it tells you something about his stance on looting. It tells you that half of America is going to support that general sentiment.
Yeah.
It tells you all sorts of things, and so again, maybe charitable is the wrong word. But I would maintain that the non-charitable way to think about it is Trump is an idiot. He's evil. He's mad. Which is actually most of the lefties' view of Trump. And lefties like us are absolutely flabbergasted at the fact that half of America voted for Trump. Like, it's just a completely, like, how on earth can that even happen? What sort of world do we live in which that happens? Because everything Trump tweets, we view from with an uncharitable lens of this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, this guy's a madman, this guy shouldn't be in office, impeach him, whatever, etc.
Okay, I understand what's going on here. I think we're talking about the word charitable in different senses. Okay. I totally agree it's unproductive and not useful to, there'll be people who like reply to Trump's tweets trying to like dunk on him, and there's then like a circle jerk of like, oh, haha, Trump is stupid. Yeah. Totally agree. That's not productive or useful to either side, if you want to call it that. And that's not what I mean by charitable.
Okay, what do you mean by charitable?
All I mean by charitable is like,
I think uncharitable is ascribing malicious intent, where charitable is assuming that there's no malicious intent implicitly, and it just being a case of, okay, well, as in, for example, an uncharitable way of viewing the Conservative Party's policies with like economic policy is to say, these guys hate poor people.
Yeah.
A charitable way of interpreting it is by saying, well, about 50% of the economists that you ask say that trickle-down economics is a thing, and if you have tax breaks for the rich, ultimately that trickles down to the poor, and that's why we've got this thing. I think it's more useful to view it more charitably on the spectrum and saying that, okay, let's assume they have a good reason for doing this, and that reason is not that they just hate poor people.
Yep.
Equally, I think...
Okay, yeah. I think charitable was just a bad choice of words that led us down this thing. We're not in any disagreement there. My point was just that, like, there is some information, there is some useful information to be gleaned from the identity politics lens.
Oh, absolutely.
That's it. That's all I was saying. Okay.
No, the identity politics lens helps you understand why he thinks what he thinks, why half America agree with it. Yeah. Hugely important.
God, what a waste of time. We spent like 25 minutes trying to figure that out. Okay, good. So we're on the same page there. But yeah, I think this is a really good point about, like, if you want to talk or write about a controversial subject, you have to spend a lot of time establishing that you're a nice person so that people will sort of be charitable in your interpretations. And so back to the hate mail, which is what got us here, I feel like there were a couple of issues, sort of concrete issues, which this person brought up, and then kind of that it feels like that then like painted mostly you. I'm occasionally mentioned in this, but it is mostly you, to be clear.
That's fine.
Painted you to just be like this, bad person. And I'll read out a couple more bits. Calls you smug, pseudo-intellectual.
Oh yeah, fully accurate.
This is pretty interesting, actually. Yeah. She says, I've seen your type before. Ali, you are antagonistic and contrary because it makes you feel powerful and smart. You do this to your own brother, apparently. But really, it just means you aren't a good listener because maybe you have narcissistic personality disorder. So like, Yeah, I think this feels like a case of lots of uncharitable readings into the entire episode, and you as a person based on a couple of things which might be sort of disagreed with.
Yeah, fair enough.
I think that was the main thing about the hate mail. There was actually, on the topic of mails.
Although on the topic of hate mail, I've been thinking about like why does it feel mean to screenshot this email and post it on my Instagram story, whereas it doesn't feel mean to do the same to YouTube comments? It's because YouTube comments are public, and for someone posting them publicly, it's like it is now fair game for me to dunk on you.
Yep.
And if it's whereas a private email sent is probably not fair game for me to dunk on, which is why I was thinking that is this because I was thinking I'd want to post this on my Instagram just for bans, but it felt weird, and the reason it felt weird is because the public private thing. So if anyone wants to dunk on me publicly, then please do, because then I can post it on my Instagram story because it's just absolutely hilarious.
Cool. So we got another email. I'm reading this for the first time, so just give me a second.
While you're reading that, in other exciting news, I've started to take existential risk more seriously as well.
Really?
Yeah, it was after listening to a Naval podcast and realizing, damn, this existential risk stuff is actually pretty important.
Right. So when Trump says that
exactly.
there's an existential risk of China, you don't listen. Okay, so this other email was interesting. It's from someone who mentioned that they generally like the podcasts, but they were a bit disappointed with the last one because I think they feel like we didn't dwell on the statistics side enough, and we kind of were too left leaning basically. Apparently, Tamor kind of shut Ali down after the first sentences into the discussion about the statistics stuff, and we should have. They would have found a more diverse discussion, especially with more statistics and data points about this stuff, to be quite interesting. I agree. Maybe that would have been interesting. The thing is, like, we actually aren't terribly well read about.
Yeah, we didn't know anything at all. I was just saying that I watched a few Stephen Crowder videos that seemed to cite FBI statistics, and they seem pretty legit.
And I think when it comes to this statistics stuff, I'm hugely skeptical of it in general. I think, like, you should.
Skeptical of the stats.
Yeah, if you want to go down that route, you really have to spend a lot of time digging into it and understanding every little detail and nuance about what the numbers are, how they were collected, and all this kind of stuff. I think for me, the stat stuff is very like all or nothing. There is no point like half-arsing it or partially arsing it because it's just far too easy to reach the wrong conclusions. So I prefer, that's why I actively wanted to shut it down, because I think like it really is all or nothing. Anyway, so those are the two kind of hate mail things. We also got like a really interesting voice note from a new listener who's actually the father of a long-time listener. Let me try and find this. Yes, here we go. So this is a 15-minute long voice note. So we'll play the whole thing now, and we'll probably like cut the sort of main points or interesting bits and put it and play it right now in the audio during the podcast. Okay.
Hello, not overthinking podcasters. My daughter Alice sent a link to your excellent podcast, and I listened for the first time today, and I'm a new fan. I'm 51, I'm probably outside your target demographic, but I used to be a right-winger, and you asked for audio feedback, so here it is. Feel free to ignore it, use it, whatever. This is feedback to your episode Racism, Social Justice and Figuring Stuff Out, released on 7th of June 2020. Here's the short version, because I tend to go on a bit. 3 points. 1. There's a very good BBC podcast on the numbers released on the same day that your podcast was released. Under laboratory conditions, with identical circumstances, black people are 3 times more likely to be killed. Obviously, people didn't actually kill them in the laboratory, but, using scientific conditions. Racism is simple. It's measurable. It's been proven time and again in laboratory conditions. So don't be fooled by the "it's complicated" story put out by right-wing think tanks and across the media. The problem is not complicated. The reasons and the solution might be, but the problem itself is very stark. 2. Now take this from an older listener. Please keep left-wing, especially when you get older and get tired of fighting. A lot of people are then persuaded by slick but misleading statistics that can be traced to right-wing think tanks. Don't fall for it. Which leads to my 3rd point. If right-wing arguments ever do seem persuasive, this is due to vastly greater funding. I've watched the rise of the think tank and capture of the media for almost 50 years now, including a degree in film and media back in the 1980s. My point is that persuasive rhetoric and sound logic are not the same thing, as you know. You ask how deep thinkers can justify racism. Now, in my experience, the more thoughtful ones justify it by saying that civilization is fragile. They say we're only a step away from barbarism, and all your touchy-feely stuff will cause anarchy. They say that however bad 1,000 deaths are, they are nothing compared with what would happen if the system broke. They say that life is just tough. Now, I have a racist friend who's a very deep thinker. He has to get up very early in the morning to do a tough, skilled manual job. His view is that life is just tough. Man up. Find a way. The Asians do it, he says. They're a different race as well. But they just knuckle down, work ridiculous long hours, fit in, work hard, and eventually, after a couple of generations, they're doing really well. Now, this is based on the I earned what I have theory, which is superficially appealing but does not stand up to close examination in my view. But it is a good seek into why I used to be right-wing and why I'm not now. Okay, about me. My name is Chris Tolworthy. I'm an aged amateur game developer. As a teenager, I was very right-wing, although I didn't realise it. My old economics teacher used to call me slightly right of Genghis Khan. And this is why. I was fascinated by compound growth. I believed that people create wealth through their hard work, and I believed that stability was the key to prosperity. Now, these things are, of course, true in a narrow theoretical sense, one that's easy to understand, but when you look at it in more detail, it's nonsense. So when people are busy taxpayers, or they're very busy podcasters, who maybe get exhausted with the constant battle at some time when you're 30 or 40 or whatever, it's very easy to pick up these theories and think, wow, I understand economics now, I understand the world. And you think that Ludwig van Mises must have been right, but history tells a different story. As primates, we're actually not very interested in growth. All the research shows that we're interested in having the same or more than the next ape. And that's the basis of economics and history, and that's why so much of it is based on enslaving others in 100 different ways. As a rule, we do not create wealth. If you factor in environmental and long-term costs, almost no industry is profitable. It's called externalities, or you can call it stealing. It's the basis for the economy. As for stability, that I also believed in as a teenager, unequal societies are by their nature unstable, and it's the instability that gives the right-wingers their money, mainly due to the precarious stress at the bottom, but also the opportunities for rapid acquisition at the top. So in a nutshell, that's why I'm a right-winger, or rather why I was a right-winger, and why I then realised I was an idiot. Oh, and by the way, I also have mild autism, which is why I'll probably say far too much, and which means in the highly unlikely event that you email me and say, fancy a live interview, I'll go running and hiding with pillows over my head. So, sorry. Okay, the rest of this is what I wrote to my daughter, so I'm just going to read the emails. First one. I'm listening to the podcast now. I'll catch up on earlier episodes later. Excellent stuff. Thanks for recommending it. I'm so glad it's not American or Australian. Here I am prejudiced, eh? Even the best US and Aussie podcasts seem to be either dumbed down, like NPR, or the I do science, therefore all my opinions are founded on bedrock, such as Sam Harris. And that's not how science works. Science is about narrow focus, and hard sciences are especially focused. So, unless you're an ecologist or a social scientist, then your science-based morality is probably dangerously narrow, in my view. Now, both the dumbed-down podcasts and the hard science podcasts, they're just too triumphalist and condescending for my taste. But I suppose triumphalism is also just the American culture and the Australian culture. It's similar due to a similar history of stealing lots of land and still not realising why that is a bad thing. So I'm reading this. I'm such a prejudiced person. Okay, back to reading. Anyway, very happy to see this is a British podcast and not dumbed down and not a me science, you dumb. Second email. I'm 20 minutes in and interested in how one of the two has swallowed the right-wing talking point at it's complicated, and he guesses that maybe 50 deaths over the last 5 years. Glad that the other presenter is pushing back. I hope he comes back really hard with the stats because it's not complicated. Numerous studies have shown that under identical circumstances, being black means you are 3 times as likely to be killed, far more likely to have a bad outcome in every way, and so on. It's not complicated. It's been proven in blind studies again and again. It is simple. To most Americans, black lives matter 1/3 as much as white lives. As for the 50 deaths, that depends on how you count them, but by most counts, it's more like in the thousands. That BBC link has the details. It's to the Inquiry, Radio 4, Sunday, 7th of June, 8 p.m. You can find it on the BBC website at bbc.co.uk/programs/M000K6H3, all lowercase. Another email. I'm listening to the podcast and more. 30 minutes in. Very impressive. Between the 20 to 25-minute mark, when I thought they would get into big statistics, they didn't. And at first I was like, do your homework! But as they talk some more, I think they have the right approach. This podcast illustrates why an arts education matters. Instead of the usual lies, damned lies, and statistics, where each expert will shout the other one down with his cherry-picked facts, they're able to look at it at a much higher level. And they talk about who we trust, our priorities, stuff that matters. Now, sure, STEM topics are great, but they breed narrow minds. If you want real thinkers, you want the arts. Anyway, my point. They mention how right-wing commentators can make very convincing arguments if you listen a lot. Now, as somebody who has listened to a ton of these arguments and keeps a lot of right-wing friends on Facebook, I would say this is an illusion, though it may have been true 30 years ago. This is not simply the case that I've grown up and know everything seems smarter when you're a teenager, but it's part of the objective changes since 1980 that I often mention. Now, here are some examples. When I was at university, I was always in the library reading politics and science. This was back in the 1980s. In fact, I was reading the science and politics far more than I was reading any coursework that I was supposed to be doing. Now, the educated magazines, the ones that were worth reading, they fell into three categories. First, you had the right wing, like The Spectator. Second, left wing, like The New Statesman. And third, you had the super educated, like the Times Literary Supplement. There were also some very well-informed news sources like Private Eye and The Economist, but they avoided the big issues and focused on current events. Now, I'm no expert, but I was in their position 30 years ago. I mean, the podcaster's position back when I was young. I saw the right wing, I saw the left wing. It seemed about the same. Now, to illustrate the intellectual world back then, by a curious coincidence, both The Spectator, the right wing, and The New Statesman, the left wing, back in the 80s, once had a section for light relief. And I found copies of them where they both asked readers to write spoof Shakespeare stuff. So this is quite a good way to compare the two readerships. Now, the Spectator results were just miles better than the New Statesman ones. These people really knew their Shakespeare. It was hilarious, it was really great stuff. Now, they knew their Shakespeare largely because throughout history, learning the classics has been the way for rich people to signal they have money. And I'm sure the left-wing mag was better in other ways. But the point was, on this topic, a direct comparison, The Spectator, the right-wing magazine, blew them out of the water. But the point was, back in the 1980s, yes, right-wing, left-wing discourse, you can get some pretty good stuff on both sides. And it's very easy to listen to one and be convinced, listen to the other, be convinced, and so on. And you can go deeper and deeper and deeper. It takes a long time before you start to think, wait a minute, one of these things is not like the other. So what happened? What changed? Now, you may have heard of somebody called Margaret Hilda Thatcher. Smiley face. She made everything about money. Every law, every business transaction became cutthroat competition. This also came at the time of new printing technology. Remember, I mentioned my film and media degree. This was a really big thing at the time. You had to publish and you had to get readers quickly. There was just no time for building a reputation. Now, the right wing was perfectly on board with that, and the result was that all magazines became about winning. Now, the easiest way to get readers quickly is through getting people ideologically outraged. You certainly don't want to imply that your enemy might have good ideas. It was a race to the intellectual bottom, and the quality on both sides, left and right, declined. This was back in the 80s, and there was a time when Boris Johnson rose to prominence. He was telling lies about Europe to get right-wingers angry. He was a classic example of what happened at that period. All surface, no depth. Now, he did have a party piece of reciting a few pieces from the classics, so he could sound clever and avoid talking about issues, which was kind of like a parrot who can repeat Shakespeare at a high pitch and then poo on your floor. But then, of course, the internet happened, and deep thought was over, at least in public discourse. Now, meanwhile, in America, the right wing had perfected its wedge issue strategy. They were working on this throughout the 1970s. It really came into its own when they got Reagan in power. So very well-funded think tanks, they found that just the right topics would trigger poor people into voting for the rich. You see, it used to be the poor people would go to church and the minister would be educated. And you got really great people like Mr. Rogers and Jimmy Carter. They were both ministers who went on to great things. And that was mainstream religion up until the late 1970s. But they were replaced by TV evangelists who were screaming about the evils of abortion. Now, at the same time that religion was dumbing people down, the think tanks were pushing to get evolution out of schools and have more and more people homeschooled for religious reasons, and to defund the regular schools, to take money away from libraries and so on. Everything to dumb it down. Now, why would they do this? It wasn't because they were evil. Well, they were, but it wasn't because they were evil. It was intellectually consistent to them because they saw only one purpose in education: to work for an employer or to get money yourself. Money was everything. And from their perspective, being compliant was far more valuable to an employer than learning to question. and being able to duck and dive and find the angle to get the money, that was the best thing of all. So all these big employers, they wanted people to be compliant, to be desperate, to work hard, not think about anything that wasn't their job. That's what they wanted. So they wanted good employees. They did not want people who were going to question and create trouble and ask for more money, of course. They played a very long game. They had a great success with getting Reagan in power, and of course he then changed a lot of the laws. And now we have Trump or whatever corporate puppet comes next. And this is the end game. My point is that the level of discourse has really declined over the last 30 years. But both sides work very hard and sounding superficially good. The think tanks, they put out talking points, and whatever statistics are needed for a busy person who can only read for, say, half an hour. So both sides then look convincing. The left wing looks convincing because it's got all these academics. The right wing looks convincing because it's slick, it's got the statistics, it's got the talking points. Now, during all this time, a few people still do care about deep thought. You remember my third category, the super educated, people who write the Times literary supplement. Now, they tend to be left-wing, or mildly right-wing, but politics moved so far to the right in the 1990s and 2000s that the old thoughtful right-wingers now sound left-wing. But how can one underpaid and overworked professor compete with a dozen highly funded think tanks who can swamp the media with pre-made arguments? And how do they compete with billionaires who buy up all the mainstream media? And when they can't buy up the mainstream media, like with the BBC, the millionaires and billionaires will lobby to make sure that their political appointees are at the top. And they then use their newspapers to attack the BBC and to make journalists terrified to say anything critical, or they'll be crucified in the press and online. So that's my main point. The level of discourse has declined over the last 30 years, 40 years. If you're it's 2020. So if you see something about Black Lives Matter and the graphs look convincing, it's because you're probably very busy and don't have an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours to trace every source of data. And then you'd find your audience wouldn't understand what you were talking about because there are issues with sampling, with mode versus mean, with confidence levels, with distribution and so on. And it's all provided by very well-paid think tanks. There's a lot of money in this, in getting their people in power and their employees doing what they want their employees to do. Now, if you subtract all the think tank-funded professors from academia, the ones who remain, the highly educated people, the ones who are not actually paid to think a certain way, you will find they're almost 100% left-wing. Some are only moderately, some are more so. But it's true what they say. Reality has a left-wing bias. And that's it. Okay, to recap my emails and all this stuff I've been saying. 1. Racism is proven in the laboratory. Under identical conditions, a black person is 3 times more likely to be killed. 2. Please keep being lefty. Right-wing arguments are a lot worse than they look. They're a lot worse than they used to be, and they were never very good. And 3, those right-wing talking points are from very well-funded think tanks. Academics who are not funded by think tanks all tend to be left-wing. And that's it. Thanks for listening. Hit send.
Okay, cool. So we just listened to the 15-minute or so voice note. We'll just put the whole thing in the episode because I think it was all actually pretty interesting. There was not much dead time in there. So I was making a note of what I thought were his main points. The first was that you shouldn't be fooled by the "it's complicated" story. And I think that's kind of that was the thing that you were saying in the last episode, that, you know, it seemed really obvious, and then like you saw that some right-wing people were saying this and they were saying it's complicated, and yeah, so maybe it's complicated kind of thing. So he thinks you shouldn't be fooled by that. I thought the really interesting thing was the sort of more historical look at the sort of discourse over the past few decades. I think this had a bias towards the UK, but that's something I just like. Yeah, I basically know nothing about how things used to be. And his point was essentially that the level of discourse on all sides has actually declined significantly over the past few decades, and that the media is relatively rigged by right-wing, very well-funded right-wing think tanks that can sort of peddle their own narratives, and they can lobby to get their own, you know, people with their views at the top. And he was saying that in the 80s, there was actually good discourse on both sides, and it was this kind of situation that we talked about in the episode, where it's like, you know, you read from one expert on one side and it sounds pretty good, and you read from another expert on another side and it also sounds pretty good. He was saying that was actually the case in the 80s, according to him. But yeah, since then it's kind of declined, mostly because of the whole attention span thing, and everything now is optimized to be digestible by a busy person in a 30-minute time span. And both sides craft their narratives according to this, and the right wing side tends to also use sort of numbers and statistics. And as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, I really think those are like an all or nothing thing. Any story can be told in a 30-minute time span with any set of numbers. And so he thinks the right-wing arguments are a lot worse than they actually look, and that you shouldn't fall for slick and misleading statistics that ultimately come from just well-funded think tanks, and that persuasive rhetoric is not the same thing as sound logic, which is kind of what I was trying to express in the last episode, where I think I said something along the lines of, it all sounds very good and sciencey, and I think the stuff he said about science was really really good.
Science good, you dumb.
Yeah, no, me science,
me science, you dumb. That's the one.
Yeah, and like there is this kind of very like hijacking of science almost, where there is this sense that I do science, therefore all my opinions are founded on bedrock and objective truth and all this kind of stuff, and me science, you dumb kind of thing. And he thinks that people like Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson, their like scientific badge kind of lends them all like far more credibility than it probably should. So I think those were the main points. What did you think?
Yeah, I thought it was very good. It made a lot of sense. I think the historical look was very interesting, and that's kind of inspired me more to read. I think it would be interesting taking out a subscription to The Spectator and also The New Statesman, just to sort of see those two somewhat premium publications writing about this sort of stuff. Yeah. Because the thing that concerns me is that, I get most of my news through Twitter, and obviously getting news through Twitter and reading a random article here and there is clearly not a substitute for actually being well informed about any of these issues at all. And so potentially for me, I need to kind of broaden my pool of stuff that I consume, so that it's not stuff that fits into 280 characters, because obviously that doesn't lead to any kind of nuance at all. I think it's interesting how... Can you turn the volume on this thing now? I think it's interesting how he said that as you grow old, stay left-leaning if you can, because the default motion is towards the right as people get older, as people start to have jobs, start paying taxes, start to have kids, think about putting those kids through school and all that costs money. Like, people are the most staunch lefty that they will ever be when they're at university. And then a load of those people switch over to the right. So I think it's that's something that I've always been a little bit wary of, that like, why is this the case? Is this pure self-interest? Or is it that as you get older, you understand more nuanced arguments and you're less swayed by the groupthink, which is very much a thing in kind of left universities?
That's a very interesting framing,
yeah,
which I think is very wrong.
Oh, okay, how so?
So your framing is that there is one correct side, and either when you're young, you're like blind to the truth, and you sort of become more aware of the truth. I don't know, you can like see through the BS or something when you get older, and that's why you switch views. That was kind of what you're saying, right?
That was I was saying. Okay, no, that's not quite what I was saying. I was saying that there is this observable motion towards the right.
Yeah, that's
as
fine.
people
That's
get
fine.
Older.
But then you said something about why that's the case. Why that might be the case.
I said I wonder if maybe the reason is that as people get older, they become more self-interested.
Okay.
I said alternatively, perhaps it's the case that as people get older, they start to be less involved in groupthink and therefore are more able to weigh both sides of an issue.
Okay.
I'm not saying that's necessarily what happens. I'm saying it's one plausible explanation for why this might be happening.
Yeah. So I've been reading this book, A Conflict of Visions, which I mentioned, and that actually has a very good like way of looking at this. I'm only like, I don't know, 5% or 10% of the way through. It's a pretty long and dense book, but essentially, I think the argument he's laying out, and look, I'm very like early in the book. The argument he's laying out is that there are broadly two different visions of man that people hold. Okay, the first, and look, I'm completely spitballing here. I don't have notes for any of
Go
this.
for it. It's all good.
So
we trust that you're a good person.
Read the book.
I'll call that stuff about there's a person on the end of that email. I think everyone has like you've got some good brownie points in your corner right now.
No, I'm not worried about that. I'm just worried about like misrepresenting what this guy's saying. We'll do a big discussion on it when I'm done. But from what I recall, he thinks there are two possible visions of man. All right, there's what he calls the unconstrained vision, and there's what he calls the constrained vision. And broadly, the unconstrained vision of man is that it is possible. Currently man is in a imperfect moral state, but it's possible for man to achieve like this moral nirvana where you kind of don't need sort of you don't need to enforce things, you don't need to like control the people or anything, because the people are at this moral nirvana where they will all act in sort of everyone's best interests and all this kind of stuff. That's the unconstrained vision of man. And then there's the constrained vision, which is that man is imperfect. That's just the way it is. We're not going to become more moral than we are today. And so the point of organization of people is to kind of provide the right structures and incentives to make people sort of accidentally help wider society. And so the sort of constrained vision is sort of underlies a lot of, more conservative leaning philosophy, economics, and stuff like that. Adam Smith, his whole Adam Smith, who, I don't know, I think he has a reasonable claim to kind of founding modern kind of capitalism, or this way of thinking about things in terms of markets and stuff. His whole capitalism thing is very much it very much assumes the constrained vision of man, where you have to create incentive structures to get people to do things. Otherwise, they just won't be nice to each other, essentially. Whereas a lot of the more kind of left-leaning stuff, and he's mentioned some philosophers whose thoughts also kind of founded on this, has more of the unconstrained vision, where like we can become more moral, over time as people. And so the thing you're saying about the reason you'll switch from left to right is either you become more self-interested, or you're just able to see through the BS or something. I think this guy would disagree. And I think another way to look at it is that your vision of man changes. You might start off with a very optimistic, unconstrained vision of man when you're younger. They're like, we could be so moral, we could be so nice to each other. Let's do that. And as you get older, maybe you reach the conclusion that actually, that's pretty hard. I think man is fixed in their immoral ways, and we need organization to kind of force people to do nice things to each other. So yeah, that's just another way of looking at it from this book. It's pretty good.
Oh damn! Sounds like I need to read this book, mate. There's all sorts of these good books that I really want to read, but I just.
All right, let's have it out. Why do you never read anything of substance? I've recommended you so much genuinely insightful, substantial stuff.
What?
This one, for example.
I mean, apart from that,
transaction analysis stuff from a couple.
We've done book discussions on that. It's no longer high on my priority list. Anything else that you've recommended that I haven't read?
Have you read the Wright brothers?
No.
Right. Why do you? I mean, this point has been coming up for basically since we started this podcast.
Yeah.
Of me saying, why don't you read anything substantial? And you just being like, oh well, whatever. I've got my fantasy. I've got my Tim Ferriss and my self-help books. I make my YouTube videos from it. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Don't you think there is something to be gained from reading substantial books?
I think there is.
Then why don't you do it?
Because it's a return on investment thing. It's a making the time for it thing.
What is the return you see here?
The return is kind of useful output.
Sorry?
The return in the short term is useful output.
What do you mean useful output? Do you mean like concretely, if I read the self-help book, I can then make a YouTube video and a Skillshare course about it?
Correct.
That's what you're thinking when you're reading these books?
Yes.
Okay. At what point do you think you might switch to a more medium or long-term view of trying to sort of level up your own thinking and view of the world?
When I no longer have a full-time job, and it's no longer a struggle to churn out 3 videos a week.
Okay.
Is that reasonable?
I don't know, man. This all seems very, very shallow and short-sighted to me. And actually, here's another beef. I have with you.
Oh, yeah?
This is a huge bias that you have, which I think results in a lot of poor thinking on your part. Yeah. You have a very strong bias towards what I call legibility. Yeah. You only focus on things which are perfectly legible. So, if you read this book, if you read some here's a new way to do note-taking book, it's a very legible thing to you. It's like, okay, I can read this book. Maybe my notes will get better. I can definitely make a YouTube video. I can make half a Skillshare course. You focus on sort of things which are very obviously legible. Again, with the stuff about statistics in the last episode, this was my whole point. The statistics and the whole point counterpoint style discussion. Again, it's just such a huge bias towards things that are legible, and there's an underlying assumption that the things that are legible are the only things that matter almost. And I just think that's like so untrue. And it seems like a lot of what you do is centered around this idea of legibility.
Correct.
Don't you think that's bad?
I think it's bad in the long term. I think it's very reasonable in the short term.
Aren't you all about like long-term thinking? You know, ideally you want to kind of be living your life as if, you know, you do the same thing for the rest of your life or something. Sure. You have a go at people who have this mindset of like, oh, cool, yeah, once I quit my job, then I'll do this. Or like, oh, once I get the promotion, then I'll quit my job or whatever. Yeah. And you're saying the exact same stuff. Oh, once I'm unemployed, then I'll start reading substantial books. Or like, oh, I'll do it at some point in the future, you know? Like, it just goes completely against your whole spiel.
I don't think it does. I think my spiel is more about what are the things that you're optimizing for? Okay. What's the game that you're playing, and what are the victory conditions of that particular game? And I think it's very reasonable to have different seasons of life. Yeah. When you're in a season of life where you're working full time and struggling to kind of keep on top of the workload of workload in air quotes of churning out YouTube videos and Skillshare classes, that is the victory condition for that is how do I maximize my units of output, i.e. the videos and Skillshare classes that I can churn out. Yeah. Skillshare.com/not-overthinking. Knowing that this is a specific season of life.
Okay.
It's that season of life where you're thinking, okay, I actually don't mind not sleeping 8 hours a night. I'm actually going to deliberately only sleep 6.5 hours a night because I know I can function by that. Maybe I'll feel a bit grim in the mornings, but that's fine because it gives me an extra an hour and a half where I can get my workout in because that's a priority for me. That is not a season of life where I think this is a good time to delve into, you know, an 800-page, really, really, really dense book that's going to require me to sit and think about this academically to actually have any sort of semblance of understanding. It's a season of life where it's more like, okay, let me find the legible things, let me find the low-hanging fruit because I've got this platform where I've got a fancy camera, I've got an editor who works for me, I can churn out YouTube videos about the legible stuff because it's the legible stuff that actually make the most difference to people's lives that I actually care about. Most students in the world, for example, don't know how to manage a calendar, don't know how to use a to-do list, don't know how to use an email app, type really slowly. These are things that they can all improve on very, very easily. It's very low-hanging fruit. Most people in the world do not care about leveling up their thinking by reading some dense treatise about transactional analysis. It's like a niche thing, and I agree. It's really useful for me personally to level up my thinking, and ultimately it will be useful for my content and sort of stuff that I can help people on to level up that thinking in a way that takes in outside perspectives other than what's the best-selling New York Times bestseller in the self-help business book category. But right now, there's so much more benefit to be had in plucking the low-hanging fruit from the business self-help book category. And given that I have a limited amount of time and a limited amount of inclination to do this sort of stuff, it means that all these kind of, yes, at some point I would love to be more well-versed about everything. It's just not high on the priority list right now, given the game that I'm playing and the victory conditions of the game.
Yeah, okay, I think that's reasonable. But like, when do you think this season will end? I mean, you're saying now that, okay, you know, once I'm unemployed, I will do some more kind of personal development stuff.
Personal development? What, as in, that sounds a lot like self-help.
Personal development as in like trying to level up your own thinking and trying to read more substantial things.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's literally the exact point. This is like kind of why part of my thing is that, okay, well, you know, if I can do this kind of wake up in the morning, go to the gym, make sure that in the morning I do my writing 1,000 words because that'll help level up my thinking in some capacity, make sure I can get my flashcards and question banks out of the way early so like later on in the day, I'll kind of chill in a coffee shop and read something more substantial, which is why right now I'm reading books like How to Take Smart Notes because I know that in preparing for this kind of season 3 of the vlog, i.e. this kind of sabbatical that I've got where I've got a bit more free time on my hands, I'll be able to actually get something out of reading a book like this, like you're reading, rather than reading 5% of it and then trying to spitball the rest of it, for example.
All right, fine. That sounds pretty reasonable. Okay, so where were we before? Oh yeah, so we
okay. I think we should draw this. It's like 3 o'clock now. We've been going for like how long have we been recording for?
An hour and 25 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, but that was basically the end. Yeah, we wanted to play this this voice recording.
Yeah, no,
and talk about that a bit.
Thank you very much too. What's the name, Richard?
Chris Tolworthy.
Chris, thank you very much, Chris, for sending that in. That was like enormously helpful. And it's nice having different perspectives.
Yep.
On this sort of stuff.
Cool. Yeah, let's call it to a close. We should have some lunch. Let's just read a review. Oh, here's a. Yeah, we'll read a negative review. So we had a negative review on the racism episode. The title was Privileged Dudes Talking About Racism. Zine W from the United States of America said, I like listening to you guys in general, but the episode about racism lacks sensibility, and you clearly show detachment from any sort of responsibility in the current crisis. You just regurgitate quotes from books from an outsider, comfortable seat, especially Ali. You need to humble down, dude. Listen more. Try to understand the perspective of another. I'd love to hear a part 2 on the topic where you show some respect and a true effort in understanding the situation.
Ooh.
Pretty interesting.
Interesting.
Thank you to Zine for the review. And thank you to you guys for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Bye. Oh, damn.
All right. We can do. You can send the video stuff to Elizabeth or whatever to sort out. But
that's it for this week. Thank you for listening.
if you like this episode, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or on the Apple Podcasts website if you're not using an iPhone. There's a link in the show notes.
If you've got any thoughts on this episode or any ideas for new podcast topics, we'd love to get an audio message from you with your conundrum, question, or just anything that we could discuss.
Yeah, if you're up for having your voice played on the podcast and your question being the springboard for our discussion, email us an audio file MP3 or voice note to hi@notoverthinking.com.
If you've got thoughts but you'd rather not have your voice played publicly, that's fine as well. Tweet or DM us at NOverthinking on Twitter, please.
Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.